Blood soaked the floor of the entire hallway laid out in front of me. I looked at all the bodies laying in pieces around me. How did I get here? I thought to myself. What's happening? Look at me, a voice said from behind me. I turned and saw a doctor in a lab coat, his face a frozen, expressionless mask in front of me. His eyes had a glint of concern in them. Are you okay? Are you hurt? What's going on? I asked, confused. He shook his head. That's a long story, he said. I have time, I responded. Then a memory came to me. This is a mutated form of Ebola, the young woman said in front of me through her gas mask, holding the vial of clear liquid up with a gloved hand. I backed away instinctively. And just why the hell are you keeping it here? I asked, my heart racing. This is just a last resort, she said. In case the citizens ever try to rebel, we can release the virus and the federal government will go ahead and impose martial law. A dictatorship will form in the USA, and it will be run by the military, with every road blocked off and every citizen imprisoned in his house, only allowed to go out to work if we allow them. Well, I don't want to be anywhere near that crap, I said, angry and afraid. You should destroy it. If that gets out, it would spread like wildfire with a massive death rate. People would be bleeding out in the streets, waiting in lines miles long for the hospital as every vital service in the city shuts down. It would be the end of our society. Who would do such a thing? Just to keep power? I came back to the present moment, the doctor staring at me with his cold gray eyes impassively looking through me. Ah, you look like you're starting to remember, he said, the first traces of a smile forming on his face. So, it got out, I said flatly, unsurprised. Yes, sadly it did, he said. But the good news is, you have a genetic mutation. You're not even affected, except for the memory loss. The memory loss occurs in many of the immune subjects. It is transient and quickly fades. The memory loss? I asked, still feeling unsure. There was too much going on, it felt like, and I only had one tiny piece of what I needed. And then it all came flooding back to me. No memory loss, I said, grinning. I remember everything. And so I did. That morning had started like any other. I drank a cup of coffee, ate breakfast, smoked a cigarette, and got into my car to go to work. I was just a janitor at a medical research facility. It was a black ops site requiring high security clearance, so I was paid significantly more than any normal janitor. But this wasn't exactly what I wanted to do with my life. It wasn't my plan when I joined the army to end up mopping hallways and cleaning up vomit for a living. On the way to work, I saw a homeless man with crazy-looking hair sticking up all over his head on the city street outside our facility. He held up a cardboard sign, and across it, scrawled in black permanent marker, he had written, "The end is near, have you made your peace yet?" Fucking crazy asshole, I said to myself. He appeared to be talking to himself incessantly, a worn brown long coat covering his thin, shaking frame. I kept driving, coming to the security gate and flashing my ID card. As I walked into the building, I realized the halls were totally empty. Where was everyone? Normally, doctors, nurses, scientists, patients, and family members crowded the hallways, and I had a hard time pushing through. This was one of the few places that accepted poor people from the surrounding area for medical research trials. They had experimental cancer treatments that they gave low-income patients for free, as long as they signed an NDA and agreed to be subjected to medical testing whenever necessary. But there were far darker things in this building than that. The bottom floors also tested out new mutations in biological weapon agents, as well as certain experimental chemical weapons, mostly on prisoners or homeless people or others that no one would notice were missing. "Anthony," someone said from behind me. I turned to notice a beautiful, red-headed young female doctor standing there, one that I had only talked to a few times before, named Dr. Kreutzmann. "Hi, Dr. Kreutzmann," I said happily, sipping at my coffee. "Where is everyone today?" "Today is a special day," she said cryptically. "We are testing out a new agent. No one is allowed in that is not necessary for the hospital's functioning, or for the test we're carrying out. It is rated Category 5, so you know the drill." I did. Category 5 referred to the most dangerous bioweapon agents in the world. Smallpox, mutated forms of rabies that could spread through the air, bioengineered flu strains that caused bleeding from every orifice in most subjects, and other things even worse that the government liked to keep concealed from everyday citizens. I suddenly felt anxious. I didn't like being around that stuff at all. The happiness I had felt as I drove in on this sunny summer morning drained out of me. Frowning at her, I nodded slowly. "Anyways, I'm sorry to say this is not a purely social call," Dr. Kreutzmann said to me, the corners of her lips turning up in the faintest traces of a smile. "The doctors and I involved in Agent Kali, which is the classified name for the substance, wanted to know if you could give us some extra help today, securing the patients and all that. Some of them are bad people, Anthony, taken from the Islamic State or from the Supermax federal prisons across the country. We need as many hands on deck as we can get." "Is there a bonus involved?" I asked. Looking directly into her eyes, her smile widened. Yes. We will add $500 to your paycheck for 8 hours work on top of your usual hourly wage, an extra $500 for a single day's work. Will you help or not?" I thought about it for a fraction of a second. I really needed the extra money. My daughter was just told she needed braces, and I didn't have the thousands of dollars required for the trips to the orthodontist. I sighed. "Sure, $500. You got a deal," I said, shaking her hand. I followed her to the lowest floor of the building, 5 stories underneath the ground. We took an elevator requiring a special key and optical scanner. I had clearance to go down there anytime I wanted to clean, but I tried to spend as little time down there as I could. The place was, in a word, creepy. On each side of the wall, cell after cell lay, each with an individual in it. Some had a Middle Eastern look with long beards, others were Mexican or Central American with tattoos covering every inch of their body, even their faces, and a few looked like just regular working-class white guys with blank smiles and eyes that stared off into the distance. Those are probably serial killers, I thought to myself, resisting the sudden, absurd urge to begin laughing. As all those eyes followed me and Dr. Kreutzmann down the hall, I felt my armpits growing sweaty, my forehead being covered in a slight sheen as my heart beat too fast in my chest. I hated being down here. Why did I need to do things like this to make extra money? The hall ended in a large laboratory, the size of 30 or 40 of the cells across. Dozens of scientists and doctors in white lab coats were finishing the final preparations for the experiment, double-checking the labels on each vial, writing every few last words into the computer, preparing the gas masks and biohazard suits we would all wear that were necessary for any Category 5 agent trials. Within a few minutes, the final preparations were complete, and we were all in our gas masks and biohazard suits. Only the prisoners in the cells were still unprotected. Everyone gathered around the tall doctor in the middle of the room, looking like a SWAT officer with his gas mask and black plastic covering. I recognized him as someone I had seen around but never talked to. His name was Dr. Viserio, and he had a loud, booming voice and natural leadership quality that allowed him to quickly take over any situation. He was also the head doctor on Category 5 bioweapon agents, responsible for containment, human experimentation, and all other facets of learning about and containing such deadly substances.
"First, let me just say how proud I am of all of you,"
he said, looking around the room slowly.
"The idea of aerosolizing and mutating this amazing virus was just a pipe dream. But with all of your hard work, dedication, and commitment, we have made the impossible possible. We have come out ahead of schedule, ahead of budget, and now have a working candidate for Agent Kali. The agent will be released in 30 seconds.
The doctor said, looking at the watch on his wrist covered under a layer of clear plastic sleeving, his voice muffled and distant sounding through the mask. He pointed to the vents that led to the containment rooms on the right side of the laboratory, to each of the cells on the floor.
It is airborne, and will be released via ventilation shaft to each of the prisoners. When that happens, we will begin to open the doors and let them interact. We will take refuge in the auxiliary containment room."
He pointed to a laboratory on the left side where another room with bulletproof glass and oxygen tanks stood.
"And examine the subjects for any psychological or physical symptoms. We will keep video footage and take notes on all reactions, including the exact time and which subject they happen to. You will notice on the cameras that each of the subjects has a large number sewn down the front and back of his uniform. That will be how you mark down each subject on the notes. Does anyone have any questions?
No one did.
Okay then, let's go,
he said, ushering the crowd into the auxiliary containment room. A buzzing sound went off behind us in the main containment room on the other side of the laboratory.
The agent has been released. You now have 60 seconds to get into the room and lock the door before each of the subjects is released from their cells. In case of danger, the auxiliary containment room has tranquilizer guns, as well as semi-automatic assault rifles with preloaded magazines along the back wall. Remember that information. It could save your life.
As soon as we were all safely in the containment room and the door was locked behind us, a second buzzer went off. With the slamming sound, all the doors of the cells opened and out stepped the subjects. Terrorists, rapists, murderers, serial killers, and gang members, all of them were men. A row of cameras showed every possible angle of every part of the laboratory, halls, and cells in extremely high resolution. Countless computers recording every second of action and making copies for this vital trial. Dr. Kreutzmann grabbed my arm and took me to the side of the auxiliary containment room far away from the crowd, holding up a vial. "This is a mutated form of Ebola," she began saying, and then the memory ended. I came back to the present moment, standing in the hallway with blood and bodies all around me. Both the doctor and I had taken off our biohazard suits and gas masks. We both had the mutation, and each of us knew it. We couldn't be infected. Only 5% of the population had the mutation that made them immune to Agent Kali, and he had specifically chosen me to come down to join the experiment after looking through the mutations in my DNA. I didn't even realize they had taken and sequenced my DNA when I started working here, but in the process of being hired, they took my fingerprints and saliva samples, and had apparently done more with the latter than I ever realized. "Did you follow all of the rules?" Dr. Visario asked. "You know I did," I said. "Why do you think we're the only two still alive?" "Okay, but do you remember the rules?" he said, smirking slightly. The sudden rush of so many memories had made me feel lightheaded and disassociated. I tried to think back, frowning. Then more memories came flooding back. Some I didn't even realize I had forgotten.
Rule number 1.
Dr. Visario said to all of us, speaking as loudly as he could to counteract the muffling effects of his gas mask.
No one gets in or out. Anyone who tries to leave this place must be shot on sight. If this virus gets out, it will have a 90% death rate and kill billions of people. There will be no way to close Pandora's box once it is opened. Rule number 2. If the buzzer goes off, grab a rifle, open the auxiliary containment door with that button.
He pointed to a large red button next to the door.
And shoot anyone that approaches. Rule number 3. If the lights start flashing, close your eyes and keep them closed while you count to 100. Agent Kali is known to cause psychic powers in certain individuals, but they can only harm you or take control of your body if your eyes are open. In animal subjects, the psychic powers are fleeting and can be detected beforehand. We have added such detectors throughout every square inch on this floor. These psychic powers never last more than 100 seconds.
He finished speaking, putting his arms down. The silence felt deafening. I noticed there were no rules about taking off our biohazard suits or gas masks. I didn't realize it then, but they offered absolutely no protection against Agent Kali. Everyone in both the auxiliary containment room and all of the cells had already been exposed. The virus was so small that it was able to slip underneath microscopic cracks of the door to the containment rooms, and even slip through the gas mask or get underneath the biohazard suits and be absorbed through the skin. The speed at which the virus began working on the subjects was astounding. Within 60 seconds after leaving their cells, some of them were crying blood, their eyes covered in a layer of crimson tears. Others began bleeding out of every orifice, throwing up blood across the floors of the hallway, while more flowed out of their eyes and ears. The most susceptible people quickly dropped, perhaps 50% of the subjects, and within minutes of watching the cameras, bodies littered the entire place. But the ones who cried blood were the most interesting of all. One of them, a huge blonde serial killer with the number 22 on his shirt, looked at a Mexican man across the hallway with the number 37 on his shirt. Within seconds, the Mexican man flew up into the ceiling as if pulled up by invisible hands, his neck snapping as he hit the metal top of the hallway. Then he fell to the floor, limp as a ragdoll, his bloody eyes staring blankly up as he died. The lights began flashing, and the doctor said,
"Here it comes. It's starting. Prepare yourself."
I felt anything but prepared. I closed my eyes and listened. Outside, I heard terrible shrieks, bodies flying around as they hit the walls and ceilings. The computers and medical equipment of the main laboratory began flying all over as if they had been possessed by poltergeist. Focusing on my breathing and trying to calm my racing heart, I slowly counted to 100. I definitely didn't want to risk counting too fast and opening my eyes, only to find out it had only been 95 seconds instead of 100. And that now I was going to die in some bizarre psychic phenomenon of a poorly understood bioengineered virus. I opened my eyes and saw most of the prisoners were dead. Some of them were in pieces, as if ripped apart by ropes or chains. Legs and arms littered each side of the laboratory floor. The door to the auxiliary containment room started to issue an alarm, then slowly swung open. "Who the fuck is opening the door?" Panic voice cried out from next to me. I couldn't see anyone near the red button, but as if done by a ghost, I saw it began to press inwards. As it went all the way in, the door flew open, and outside the room stood a wall of a dozen men, formed in a semicircle, all with crying bloody eyes.
"Grab the guns."
Dr. Vasario said. People began frantically running towards the tranquilizer guns and the assault rifles on the back wall. Just then, the buzzer began frantically sounding as each of the men stepped forward in unison. At the same time, the lights began to flicker. What the fuck do I do now? I thought to myself, too petrified to speak. Did I close my eyes since lights were flashing, or did I shoot anyone that came towards the containment room? How was I supposed to shoot with my eyes closed? I stepped in front of the crowd, closing my eyes, and began rapidly shooting towards the front door with the AR-15 I held in my arms. I had no idea whether I was hitting anything, but I heard a few bullets connect with meaty thuds. The roaring of the gunshots made my ears ring, and I heard countless screams from all around me. I tried to block it all out and find some center peace during the mayhem. I slowly counted to 100 as I kept firing, and to my surprise, when I reached 100 and opened my eyes, I was still alive. I couldn't say the same for most of the staff in the auxiliary containment room. Most of them had been ripped to shreds, pieces of skin and muscle littering the walls and tables, gore completely covering the screens of the security camera feed. Looking around, I saw only Dr. Kreutzmann, Dr. Vasario, and myself still standing. The dozens of other staff members, doctors and scientists, all died while I had my eyes closed. Then, in a moment of total terror, I heard the elevator doors opening down the hall. I sprinted blindly, changing the detachable magazine with a fresh one as I went, almost slipping on the trails of blood and body pieces everywhere, but made it just as the elevator doors started to close. The tall blonde serial killer with the number 22 was standing there, crying blood and smiling ear to ear. I started shooting as fast as I could, and his head exploded just as the doors closed. I sighed in relief, hitting the button to stop the elevator from ascending, where it would bring horrors unimaginable to the world above. Then, like a tidal wave, a total feeling of amnesia and memory loss overtook me. I found myself standing there trying to remember what I was doing or who I was, but nothing came to me. I came back to the present, where Dr. Vasario and I stood looking at each other. "What happened to Dr. Kreutzmann?" I asked, and he shook his head sadly. "She didn't end up having the mutation. She bled out a few minutes ago." Just then, the elevator door pinged and a man stepped out, crazy hair all over his head, his worn brown long coat showing holes all over. He looked past me, staring with hatred at Dr. Vasario, and took a handgun out of his inner coat pocket, shooting the doctor in the head before I could respond. Remembering rule number 1, I raised my rifle towards him. He put his hands up. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Look, Dr. Vasario was a sick and sadistic man. He had to die." The man pulled out a wallet from his pocket, showing me a CIA badge. "He didn't have clearance to begin human experimentation with Agent Colley. Now we have to destroy this entire building, and we both need to get out of here." "Aren't you going to get sick, though?" I asked, unsure. I wondered whether I should shoot him, whether this was some sort of trick. No, you don't. I have the mutation, but we need to go now. The CIA is going to blow up this building in 15 minutes. We'll just say it was a gas leak or something. That's not my department to make up cover stories. But you're innocent in all of this. So come with me, let's get the hell out of this place. And I did. We ascended up the elevators, and there was a black Ford Taurus waiting for us outside, which took us far away from that den of horrors. They had me sign an NDA which said I would never tell anyone what I witnessed during the experiment with Agent Kali. They said if I broke that NDA, I would go to federal prison for the rest of my life. But they also paid me $500,000 to keep my mouth shut. The carrot and the stick, I guess. But I wasn't complaining. Now, I don't have to worry about money again for a long time.